The real problem in America is that treason is celebrated as good. We had treason with President LBJ when he ordered the fighter jets not to defend our own ship, the USS Liberty, attacked June 8th, 1967. And that whole story has been hidden from America for over 40 years. 200 American sailors shot, dead, and wounded. Over 200. And LBJ said, I want that goddamn ship at the bottom of the sea. We're not going to embarrass our ally, Israel. I'm not sure Israel was really the root problem. I think some crazy people in the military, pushed by the bank gangsters, you know who the bank gangsters are now. Names like Rothschild, Warburg, Schiff, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, Chase, Mellon. All of these people have tremendous control. You have nothing to do except to pick between the puppets they give you. And right now they want to give you a puppet called Barack Obama for 4 more years. Or you can have another choice of a different puppet called Mitt Romney for 4 years. But both of those puppets are dangling on the strings pulled by the bank gangsters. That's what the show is about tonight. Because you won't know how to take back America. You won't understand until you realize how treason has been perpetrated in this United States of America for 100 years. And our school books have stopped talking about the money trust. You know, when I was in college my freshman year on Bascom Hill, I had to go to this Econ 101. They wanted me to study economics. And I studied, and there's this M1, and there's an M2, and there's an M3, and there's a government pumping in. All that was crap. And now I realize it was crap. It took me 30, 40 years to unlearn the garbage they put in my head. There's no such thing as a business cycle that recurs so often. That's all crap. What there is the bank gangsters that extend credit and then they pull it back in and buy back all your failed businesses for pennies on the dollar, forcing people to lose homes, forcing people to lose their businesses. Right now, they're retracting the money. However, there was one congressman. His name was Ron Paul. He's running for president, and he's not the bank gangster's choice. He's the guy they're scared to death of. He was in the Air Force. Neither Mitt Romney or Barack Obama ever served a day in the military. Here's Ron Paul as a young doctor. Here he is, as a young doctor, right here. A young doctor in the Air Force. Ron Paul had managed to get himself as chairman of a committee. Not only was he one of the very first people to endorse Ronald Reagan when Reagan wasn't popular, not only did he call the New York bank gangster attorneys, that's the New York Federal Reserve Bank, he called them to account for their money that they create with their private money at interest. This is one of my favorite pictures of Ron Paul because as you see the man, and if you could zoom in, which we can't, but if you were to zoom in really close, you would see that all these pictures of Ron Paul are made up of Ron Paul's supporters' photographs. He is the people's candidate. About 100 years ago or more, there was a guy named Jennings, I think his name was Brian Jennings. He made the most famous speech, probably the most famous speech that will ever be remembered. It was called the Cross of Gold. You're not going to crucify on a cross of gold. What's been going on, and I think most people aren't going to get it, and I'm soon going to go to tape, and you're not going to see my face for a long time here, but I hope you pay very close attention, because Bill Still, who's a documentary filmmaker, gave me permission today to show you his 1996 production. on who the bank gangsters are. They're really the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Warburgs, the Schiffs, and all their cousins and interrelated families. These bank gangsters don't just go back to the founding of Bank of England, which really wasn't the Bank of England. It was really the Bank of Rothschild with the title Bank of England. But the directors of it, nobody from England was in control of the Bank of England. It was private money. The same with the Federal Reserve. They managed, after the meeting on Jekyll Island, they wrote the banking bill on Jekyll Island, then they had a U.S. Senator from Rhode Island go in and introduce it and push it through. It was all written by the bank creeps, the banker creeps, which I like to call bank gangsters, because they're literally robbing you and me. They robbed my father. They robbed my grandfather. And they're quite happy about it. This is their business, to create money that has to be paid back with interest, ignoring the biblical admonition that when you lend money, do not demand interest. Only ask for the face value back. These are anti-Christian bankers. And even the Jewish scriptures, you go way back to the Old Testament, it says, do not demand interest. So what kind of people are these? These worship money. Regardless of what religion they say they are, their real religion is the worship of power and control of money. These are the bank gangsters. And the current reigning king of the bank gangsters, to even the Queen of England, has to knock on the City of London's door to enter his banking realm. Once a year, she goes there and pays homage to him. Believe it or not, this isn't widely publicized. The Queen of England pays homage to Lord Evelyn Rothschild, who under nobility is underneath the Queen, but in reality, he's over her because he controls the Bank of England. He can crash the English economy anytime he feels like it. But what most of you Americans don't know is he can crash the American economy, and in fact, they are. This depression was manufactured, and that's why this guy, Ron Paul, is so darn important. He's running against Mitt Romney. The nomination hasn't been made and won't be made till the end of August. He's got over 200, probably over 500, maybe 700 solid delegates that won't vote for Mitt Romney under any circumstances. Now, I know Rand Paul just recently came out and said, I endorse Mitt Romney. He's supposedly going to get the nomination, and I endorse whoever gets the nomination. Well, remember, Rand Paul said he would endorse whoever got the nomination. Ron Paul didn't say that. And the Ron Paul supporters understand the most important thing to get our freedom back is to get rid of the Federal Reserve and go back to what Abraham Lincoln got assassinated for, called greenbacks. Interest-free money, not printed by what the books when I was in high school called the Eastern Banking Trust. That's a real nice name, Banking Trust. What I would call them is bank gangsters. That's not so polite. Doesn't sound nice to call people a gangster. Well, that's what they really are. And tonight I hope you're going to see that. And then we're going to show you how many Americans suffered and what they suffered at 9/11. Now, some of you think 9/11 was all about terrorism. Oh boy, we're going to get those terrorists. And we got, some of you say, my grandson or my son is over in Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya or somewhere and he's fighting the No, that's like the Vietnam War. It's all propaganda. And my heart bleeds, because I'm a Vietnam veteran. I bleed for all the guys that have died and come back with missing arms, legs, and feet. Because they aren't fighting for America. They're fighting for the bank gangsters to get rich by creating huge debts that have to be paid back with interest. My solution is, we say, so long, Federal Reserve, all your loans are now declared paid. Null and void. House loan, car loan, student loan, all of them. Everything based on the Federal Reserve, null and void, loans paid off, whatever you own, you now own free and clear. If you own a 1,000-acre ranch and you owe $2 million to the Federal Reserve subsidiary bank, whether it's J.P. Morgan or Mellon Trust or Bank of America or whatever, null and void, you own the land free and clear. Now that would be a real revolution. And I think that's possible with Ron Paul. He never said it exactly that way, but I think it's possible. Ron Paul understands we must kill the Rothschild central bank. And some of you are probably going, oh, what are you talking about, Rothschild central bank? Oh, Mr. Wagner, you lost me. Well, it's called the Federal Reserve Bank. It's not federal, it's private, owned by the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, or their subsidiary corporations, and a bunch of people that have private. And they keep two sets of books. One set they show the Congress. The other set is the real book, how much profit they're making. And they're creating money out of thin air while you're working your butt off for it. And many of you are losing your homes, your jobs. This goes back to 1694 when the Bank of England was set up this way, and every big major bank after that. Now the United States have the first central bank, and we kicked them out and passed the hidden, some people call it the lost original 13th Amendment in 1812, which has got nothing to do with the anti-slavery amendment of 1865, actually passed by Congress as an amendment after Lincoln had been assassinated, but he made the proclamation. Then it wasn't really law, had to make it legal to free the slaves, so they had an amendment. That should have been called the 14th Amendment, but they called it the 13th Amendment to try to make the original 13th Amendment disappear. Now, a guy named Gus and myself are researching this, and we have discovered, and we have the actual original book ordered published by the Congress of 1815. This is the official publisher of all the statutes at large and the Constitution, all the amendments. And in that book, which I'm going to show you one of these days soon, it includes the original 13th Amendment, which says anybody who claims a title or an honor from any foreign power, prince or principality, loses their citizenship and are no longer a U.S. citizen. That means if you're a member of the British Accreditation Registry, also known as BAR, if you remember the California Bar, the Florida Bar, New York Bar, any state bar, you have an allegiance to the British Accreditation Registry, which owes its fealty to the Queen of England. Therefore, you lose your citizenship. Now, a lot of lawyers are going to say, oh, that doesn't matter anymore, Mr. Wagner. Oh, yes, it does. That original 13th Amendment has never been repealed and was republished in many state documents right up to 1866, and one even in 1870. Creates a problem, doesn't it, if bar members cannot be judges, cannot be prosecutors, cannot be legislators. Oh my God, would that change how laws get made? And in fact, it would cure America. Why would it cure America of its ills? Because we would get rid of the bar members from the legislature, from the executive branch, from the judiciary, go back the way judges were just old businessmen that had good common sense prior to this bar thing getting involved. Nobody's going to tell you this most any other place. You're not going to hear this on ABC, Fox, or CNN. But I have the proof. I already have that proof. Now, I talked to a lawyer on a chat room a week ago and said, oh, no, they were one state short. Well, we've got the proof that that state did ratify it, and it is a legal amendment to the Constitution. Bar members cannot hold any office. And this is probably the first time and the only place on television anywhere in the United States anybody has ever told you that this plainly. Okay? Now, why did it make a difference? The bankers needed lawyers to get into American courts to push through legislation and win lawsuits to get their banks in. They lost the first bank after 20 years. Madison, enough. That brought on, when he didn't, they said, okay, you don't kick our bank out. If you do that, you're going to have a war. And that was the War of 1812. But it's too late. The original 13th was passed. Then we come and they get a second bank pushed in. Then President Andrew Jackson, who had been made famous in the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812, he understood what it was all about. He killed the second United States central bank. By this time, most people understood that these central banks weren't really government owned. They had the government name on it, but they weren't. Andrew Jackson, killed it so good. It took a meeting on Jekyll Island almost 80 years afterwards. And then they got in, they couldn't call it a central bank, people would have rioted. So they called it federal to make it sound like it's government. They called it reserve to make you believe they had reserve gold and silver to back up the money they're putting out. And in fact, they had a tiny, minuscule amount. And since 1971, they have zero, absolutely none. So we need to kill the third Rothschild bank, which we call the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States. It's not federal, it has no reserves, and it's privately owned. If you don't believe me, get out a New York phone book, look in the US government, in the front of the phone book, and see if you find Federal Reserve of New York there. It ain't there, because it's not a government institution. So then go look in the business section. There you find the Federal Reserve. Well, it was Ron Paul that pulled these lawyers up and put them on the witness stand and made them admit the New York Fed was giving 80 or more % of all their loans for 2.5 years, from about 2006 to 2008 and a half. All their loans, 80% was going to foreign bankers, foreign corporations, nothing for the New York real estate market, which was drying up and causing the catastrophe. This is not a normal business cycle. This is, forget economics 101 and the M1, the M2, all that is garbage to confuse you. It confused me 40 years ago. I got a passing grade. I blobbed the things they wanted me to blob, but it didn't make sense to me then. Now I know why. Thanks to Bill Still, thanks to G. Edward Griffin, thanks to this Austrian economist and many others, Milton Friedman and many others, I now understand. There isn't this business cycle that they talk about. It's the bank gangsters expanding and retracting. And right now they're retracting because they're trying to force us off the dollar into a new global currency. Now, I'm coming to a point. Then we're going to go to this tape because you need to see this. This is far more important that you understand what I'm going to show you here in a few minutes. But in 9/11 was really a bank heist. Had little to do with terrorism. It was a bank heist. And the bottom floors of the World Trade Center square, where there's World Trade Center towers 1 and 2, then there's buildings 3, 4, 5, and 6. And 7 was across the street, and that collapsed and no plane hit it. But the real important point was there was the gold depository. And in the 70s, after they built the Twin Towers, they moved what little gold there was left in Fort Knox to the gold depository. And every time we owed money to France or England or Poland or Russia or whatever, they didn't actually put it on a plane and fly it over to Europe. What they really did with that gold is they had different rooms. One room was the American gold stock, another room was the German, one was the Netherlands, one was France, one was Spain, one was, all the countries had their little room with their gold pile. They would just shift the gold from one room to the other and say, there, now we pay that country's central bank. And all these countries' central banks are basically clones of the Rothschild central bank. On 9/11, more than $166 billion in gold bricks disappeared and was never found again. There's one brief mention about the gold when they find about 280 million. That's less than half of 1% of all the gold. And then there's no more media about it. ABC doesn't talk about it, CBS doesn't talk about it, Fox doesn't talk about it, people. Why? Because it was stolen in the 3.5 days prior to 9/11. Over that weekend, they were just carting that gold out of there. So there was only one truck left that had gold. And why it didn't get away, I don't know.